young guest, Conservative Member of Parliament, Genuis Garnett.
Garnett Genuis.
Garnett Genuis. I'm an old woman, you know, your mama also does the same thing. Good afternoon, and how are you today?
Very well. Great to be here, and thank you so much for the kind introduction. It means a lot. It's great to be with you, to be able to talk about human rights and whatever other issues are on. I know there's so much going on in our country right now, and we're kind of coming to the end of our session in Parliament. So I think it's an exciting time for Canadian politics. A lot of important issues that a lot of people are talking about.
बहुत शुक्रिया. And Genuis Garnett Genuis, a few days ago there was a wonderful guest in our studio, a senior person. He is Saudi, from Arab News and the Saudi Gazette. Saudi, but working with the South Asians as his editors and sub-editors. He speaks such a fluent Urdu, and I think you will be working with Pakistanis and Indians, and you will master in all the languages very soon.
Well, I should start learning Urdu. It would make my mother-in-law very happy, I'm sure. Both of my wife's parents were born in Pakistan, so but I don't speak.
You don't speak Urdu.
No,
you will very soon.
I've learned to say tika when I agree with something.
This is the best word what you learned. Reason being
everything tika.
Tika, and especially in front of the wife, all the Pakistanis, Indians,
always say. Always tika.
This is the best word what you learned. Tika. She's happy. Everybody's happy.
Everybody's happy.
Now, this is the most important thing at the moment. Bill C-281, important provision to help combat, यानी आप मुकाबला कर सकते हैं human rights abuse around the world. And this is not only one country, it's two countries. Of course, we talk about Rohingya, we talk about India, we talk about China, we talk about Palestine, we talk about many other countries. Would you mind to share some information about Bill C-281, which you tabled?
Absolutely. So the bill was tabled by Philip Lawrence, who's another MP. I'm seconding the bill and working with him on it. And very, very rightly, you mentioned a number of different cases around the world of human rights abuses. And oftentimes when we're talking about human rights, we zero in on the particulars of a specific country. But this is kind of a little bit of a step back from looking at particular countries and particular situations and saying, how can we change Canadian law to establish a framework whereby the Canadian government will be prioritizing the advancement of international human rights as part of its foreign policy. So this bill has a number of different measures in it that do that at a higher level, in a way that would apply to our relationship with countries around the world, and in particular strengthening the role of Parliament, the parliamentary accountability for the government on human rights issues. Because many times when there are human rights concerns, citizens bring those to their members of Parliament, and they advocate. So the voice of Parliament is very important in putting pressure on the government. So a few of the things the bill does: number one, it requires the Minister of Foreign Affairs to table an annual report in Parliament on the work the government is doing to advance international human rights, and to identify, as part of that report, the cases of prisoners of conscience of particular concern, people that are maybe human rights defenders, journalists, cases of individuals who are unjustly detained that the government is advocating for. And we know that bringing, in the vast majority of cases, bringing more attention to these cases of unjust detention can be very helpful in moving forward public awareness and promoting the release of those figures. So that reporting to Parliament, we are amending, as part of this bill, the Magnitsky Act, and very good for people to become more aware of the Magnitsky Act. This is a special tool for sanctioning individuals who are involved in human rights abuses. So normally when people think about economic sanctions, they think about sanctions against whole countries. You can't trade with this country, you can't sell products to this country. But Magnitsky sanctions are very precisely targeted sanctions against individuals who are involved in abusing human rights. So that we would say this particular official was responsible for acts of torture, extrajudicial killing, whatever the case is, and that individual therefore is going to be sanctioned, and that means they cannot come to Canada or move their money here. And Magnitsky sanctions are especially effective when they're done in concert, where a number of countries come together and say, this individual we've identified as a human rights abuser, so we need to hold this person accountable. So the background on the Magnitsky Act is that conservatives put forward and were able to see past the Magnitsky Act in the 2 parliaments ago. So it gives the government the power to apply Magnitsky sanctions, but they haven't actually used this act very much. There have been very, very few cases of individuals who have been subject to Magnitsky sanctions. So what we're proposing in Bill C-281 is to strengthen the Magnitsky Act by allowing a committee of Parliament to, in a sense, nominate people for Magnitsky sanctions. So if a parliamentary committee passes a motion saying they want to see a particular person sanctioned, the government has to respond to that. The government, at the end of the day, is still the decision maker, and that's the way it's supposed to be. The government makes these decisions, but they have to report to Parliament on why they chose to listen or not listen to that recommendation for a sanction. And there's some other measures in the bill. There's some measures around cluster munitions, trying to do more to prevent the use of cluster munitions, which are very indiscriminate weapons that have a big impact on civilians. And then also saying that when countries are involved in certain gross human rights abuses, such as genocide, they should not be able to get a broadcasting license here in Canada if it's state-controlled media, recognizing the reality that we do have instances of state-controlled media that is in the hands of authoritarian regimes that are violating human rights, and they're using those state-controlled media to push misinformation and also sow discord. So these are some of the provisions in the International Human Rights Act. Again, not naming specific countries, but establishing this reorientation for a stronger focus on human rights.
But Garnett, you're talking about the Bill 281. This is only for Canadians. But you're talking about internationally. So how would you put together internationally?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a Canadian legislation about how the Canadian government would promote international human rights as part of its foreign policy. And you're right to note that there are limits to what we can do. When people are being killed, tortured, abused around the world, there are significant limits to what the government of Canada can do about that. Yeah. But there are still some things we can do. Yes, we can raise our voice as individuals. The government can raise its voice. They can pursue accountability mechanisms. But in this day and age, there are more things that we can do than maybe existed in the past because of the interconnections that exist among different countries. Many of the people that are involved in human rights abuses, they still want to be able to travel to other countries. They want to be able to move their money to other countries, and we see this with, to use the example of the Russian regime, right? The Russian government is so much controlled by Putin at every level. Yeah. Yeah. So people moving money out of the country and having it invested in Western countries. So if we were to have earlier taken a stronger stand and saying those people investing Putin's personal wealth in other countries, we're gonna sanction that. We're gonna freeze those assets. That would have, I believe, had a big impact in terms of deterring the violence that has taken place. So using these kind of sanction tools that target human rights abusers and having Parliament encourage the government to use that more, I think that makes a big impact. It leads to people thinking twice. We can't stop these abuses every time, but we can make people think twice about it.
See, the thing is that when you talk about the countries with the less economy in there, you can talk to them, you can do and implement all these things. But when it comes to powerful economy, do you think that you have any words to say about that?
Absolutely, I do. I still think there's what we see often in more authoritarian regimes is that senior officials around the regime, they understand that they might be vulnerable at home because the political climate can be so oppressive. We see this happen in China at certain times. There's been a shift in power dynamics, and so people want to have that escape hatch in mind. Mm-hmm. That's why they want to be able to move their money to other countries, right? Because they know that if they've been abusing the human rights of others, it could come back on them at some point. So they want to be able to move their money. They may want to be able to have that escape valve, and that's where Magnitsky sanctions are so powerful in saying to people, if you cross a certain threshold in terms of abusing human rights, you're not going to be able to have that escape hatch, and that applies regardless of how strong or weak the economy is. These deterrent measures do have an impact, because even in countries that have strong economies, people still want to travel to the U.S. and Canada and Europe. They want to be able to move their money. They want to be able to see their kids come to receive an education in North America or Europe. So these sanctions. They don't guarantee a response, but they reduce impunity, and this is a big issue in international human rights, is the issue of impunity. You have people that violate human rights and get away with it. So if we
how
can
did you get
reduce
this
that impunity,
idea? When which countries have you seen all these things?
well,
Give me an example of few countries. Yes.
well, sure. I mean, I was told that at the end of the Sri Lankan Civil War. Just in particular on this issue of impunity. At the end of the Sri Lankan Civil War, there was that heightened awareness of what was happening, and people in the international community went to the Sri Lankan military and they said, "Look, we know some of the atrocities that are happening," and they said okay, and they proceeded to do it anyways, right? And that's the effect of impunity, right? It's even when the international community can see these abuses happening, and there's so much more exposure to international to what's happening in other countries now, because we have things like satellite imagery, right? Think of the Rohingya genocide, the Uyghur genocide, the role of satellite imagery, being able to see so much more what's happening, but yet countries persist in these abuses because there aren't the consequences. So it's gotten me and others thinking, how can we ensure the consequences are there? The Magnitsky Act, the Magnitsky sanctions, I've really come to believe that this is a powerful tool, and it's not an idea I came up with. It's a long-standing idea. Bill Browder has started the idea of Magnitsky sanctions. He was an investor in Russia, and Sergei Magnitsky was his lawyer, who was brutally killed by the Russian regime, and that led him to try to think about new tools for holding the Russian government accountable. It was James Bazan who and Senator Andrzejczyk who put these things forward in our parliament, but the government isn't using this tool. So now, working with Philip Lawrence on this bill, we're thinking, how do we go further to address this issue of impunity?
माजिद भाई, I will, for my listeners, मैं बताना चाहती हूँ, बिल C 281, इसकी एक ख़ास प्रोविज़न है, that is मैग्निट्स्की sanctions अशख़ास के होंगे जो पैसा लेके निकलते हैं, और
Magnitsky Act.
हाँ, मैग्निट्स्की section जो है sanctions. You just mentioned something about Russia, and I believe all these countries who have authority to use these powers, and India, I would name one of the country, and India is the greatest ally of North America. You know what is happening these days over there with the Muslims, with the Christians as well, and what is happening in Kashmir. Mm-hmm. Even this is yesterday's news. Yeah. These countries are the big lobbyists. I was reading there is a provision in this the sanction is provision amending the Broadcast Act to make it easier to revoke the authorization for the television and radio programming in Canada that is influenced by the foreign nationals or entities. And I know these are the countries who have sent their lobbyists. They are the lobbyists. Do you think the government would be able to do something? Would they be able to stop them?
Yeah. So just on the Broadcasting Act issues, the quintessential example that people know about is RT, right? Which is, and we're talking about state-controlled media. They're not really media in the sense of expressing independent points of view, asking questions. What we understand media to be, they're state-controlled, state mouthpieces that are pushing misinformation and also sometimes participating in the demonization of minorities, right? So if you have state-controlled media that have access to broadcasting licenses here in Canada, and that state is involved in violence, we've even had cases of forced confessions, right, where people are facing torture, other abuses, and then part of that abuse they face is that they're forced to give a confession, a false confession, in media. So recognizing some of these human rights abuses that can happen through state-controlled media is something that we need to address in this this legislation does address. And let me just say to your comments on India, I think there are definitely human rights issues that are happening in India, and they're things that I've spoken about in Parliament. India's constitution talks about a secular country, and I think we need to be active in dialogue in supporting adherence to that constitutional framework and working with civil society to do that. I think we need to have those same dialogues, obviously, with leaders in Pakistan around some of the minority rights issues that exist there as well. And I think there are many countries where we need to be engaged. This legislation provides more tools to do that, right? When there are issues of arbitrary detention, then we can hold the government of Canada accountable to say, are you putting those names on your list of prisoners of conscience of particular concern? Are you highlighting these cases of people being detained as part of your human rights reports? So these are some of the issues that we will be more able to highlight through this bill.
I'm not going to let it go just like that. You just mentioned Pakistan and minority rights. What do you know about minority rights in Pakistan?
Well, I mean, I have significant concerns about the blasphemy law and the way that the blasphemy law is often used in a way that is targeting minorities, I believe. And look, I know there are many people inside of Pakistan who have heroically made the case about these issues, and I would just want to support their comments on that.
Right, he's right, because Ahmadiyas sometimes they say, but I believe this is
but individual, what individuals can say and what is really happening. If you think of 500 people died, and out of that, how many Ahmadians or Christians or these terrorists, they don't really care because they don't have no religion. So they don't really care, okay, are these minorities or majorities or whoever, they just...
Yeah, no, I understand the point you're making. There's the issue of terrorist violence, then there's also the issue of systemic barriers, right? And I think, for instance, for Ahmadiyas, there's the issue of the challenges around voting, right? Because as I understand the voting process in Pakistan, you have to identify whether you are a Muslim or not in the context of voting. Of course, Ahmadiyya Muslims.
I don't think so.
Well, this is
what the media. This is what the media tells them. Yeah. But on the other hand, my question with this, of course, there definitely there might be concerns. But on the India side, there are many times internationally Pakistan has invited a line of control, and the Kashmir. There are people from Toronto Star. They went there. They saw. But whereas India doesn't let them go. They are changing the whole area. The Citizenship Act law, they change it just to change the Kashmir voting strength. Mm-hmm. So
look, I very much believe in international access, right? I mean, to your point about access, and I would encourage any country, let reporters in, let international observers in, and if you've got a case to make to say, I know sometimes there are competing narratives, but it's always a bad sign when there are barriers in terms of access to those places, because it doesn't help a country make the case that things are fine if there's a lack of access.
Thank you very much, and I wish government of Pakistan should invite and government of India should invite to let you see the ground reality of these areas.
Yeah.
Have you ever been, or are you planning to see that in person? And then because I think the rich countries with the better GDP and economy, India is in a better position for that. I wish you can implement these to those wherever it is. You must see the ground reality rather than just relying on the media.
Yeah. So personally, I've been to India a couple times, not to Kashmir though, and I would very much appreciate the chance to. But I appreciated the opportunities I had while I was in India to have good dialogue with people on human rights and see the concerns that existed, and also to see the active debate that happened. I haven't traveled to Pakistan yet. I'm hoping to be able to at some point.
You will, inshallah.
And be able to engage in dialogue.
Which
with people
area
there.
you represent as a member of parliament?
Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan is the riding, just east of Edmonton.
You're so kind. You always stay connected with the people. You are more than welcome, even in Saskatchewan. We do have listeners in Saskatchewan as well. I request, even though if you're not here, whenever you come to Toronto, you come over. Thank you very much. But even from the Saskatchewan, if you have anything to communicate with the people, you're more than welcome anytime.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it's been it's a pleasure to be on. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you about these important human rights issues.
You're always welcome, and I believe our young generation can definitely bring a change, and you are one of those.
Thank you.
God bless you. Take care. Thank you very
you.
much.